Hi everyone, and welcome to your horoscope for the week of September 21st, 2020. This horoscope is brought to you by 1millionnights.com. We have an active, but from an astrological perspective, a much quieter sky than we were used to all throughout the year 2020. But of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to perceive it and feel it through as that much quieter, because we do have a very strong and ongoing T-square all throughout the week. Now a T-square, just like a simple square, is an aspect of tension, an energy which can be psychological in nature, it can be an inner force, but at the same time it can also be conjured up by external events, which creates an inner tension, forcing us almost to take certain actions, to make choices, to express ourselves, our opinions, our feelings. So even though it can be felt through quite intensely, for some people it can be quite negative because it can represent a challenge or the strict necessity to overcome a limitation, an obstacle, perform at your very, very best, etc. So there is an element of strong frustration to it, especially because one of the most relevant and powerful players of this T-square is Mars in its home sign of Aries retrograde. So this has frustration and stress and, the necessity to express our sovereign wills and to complete our desires written all over it. But this is also the energy which gets things done, especially, this is what gets us out of the most uncomfortable situations, states, feelings, etc. So, if we have relevant and sufficient life experience and wisdom to go with it, we can simply turn this energy into motivation to help us, stick to our path, to stick to the purpose, to follow it through with ambition, determination, and not give up or not victimize ourselves, even though the journey to get to where we want to go is not easy whatsoever. But this is easier said than done, because after all we are speaking about Mars retrograde in the sign of Aries, an energy which doesn't necessarily allow itself to be that much rational. It is very instinctual. It comes from our gut, so to speak. So it is something which is correlated with very, very quick, spontaneous, instant decisions. But sometimes that inner impulse can be anger, it can be rage, it can be frustration, it can be basically the feeling that I've had enough, I reached my breaking point, and from now onwards I'm not really that much responsible for the actions I take and for the choices I make. And this is exactly the reason why, a lot of people might not really have that inner discipline and self-knowledge, profound self-knowledge, to stop their inner impulses from taking over their decision-making processes in this period. So, if you happen to be a very impulsive kind of person, well, you don't really have to fear anything because this might be something very natural to you. So it's not really like stepping out from your safety zone, your comfort zone. This might be the way you function normally. So this energy is not really going to disadvantage you that much, only if you jump into like big excesses. For example, if you allow that anger or that inner volcano when erupting to turn into physical violence, now that might be something which will get you almost guaranteed into trouble. But if you just make choices and decisions, instantaneously out of impulse, even if that impulse sometimes in anger, if this is normal to you, well, it's not really going to disadvantage you. Quite the contrary, it will simply get things done as long as you don't jump into excess and as long as you don't allow that Mars retrograde to turn into rage, violence, something which is totally out of your control. And sometimes we do take actions when in a state of rage, which we regret later on, or maybe we do some things which we wouldn't ever allow to exteriorize, so to speak. So basically these are the hidden dangers of this energy, especially given the fact that next week Mars will form an exact conjunction with Dark Moon Lilith in Aries. And when these two very shadowy energies meet, so to speak, because Dark Moon Lilith is basically our shadow self, of course this isn't anything negative. There is no reason to fear it. It is not something that ultimately disadvantages if we, have sufficient self-knowledge. And, we don't have to be like psychologists to know what our own personal Lilith tendencies are. Because, it's basically lived experience. We know what triggers us. We know our weak points. And that is exactly what we, usually try to protect. But of course, Mars was considered by the ancients the lower malefic, so it always brings conflict, strife, etc. So the temptation for violence or overdoing, whatever you feel that you need to do is the true danger here, or perhaps overcoming your psychological limits, but in a very not so positive way. For example, if you are an introvert and you rarely get into, even an assertive conversation, not to mention aggression and anything like that, well, next week can be quite challenging, because this is where you might explode and surprise and shock everyone around you who usually perceives you as a very peace-loving, very gentle person. And as I said, this is a square, so this gets stuff done, but don't allow it to turn into some kind of an excessive manifestation. Speaking out, speaking your mind, maybe raising your tone, that is one thing. But, like destroying objects and allowing your rage to just control you, now that is a totally other type of expression, one which is not going to lead to anything positive. And why am I saying all these things? Well, because the D square also involves an opposition, and the two forces, the two astrological symbolisms that are going to oppose each other are Mars and Mercury. Mercury forms this opposition naturally from the sign of Libra, which is our relationships, our long-term relationships. For example, contracts. It can be also associate, business partner, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, concubine. Call it whatever you want if you are in a committed long-term relationship. But at the same time, it also represents our diplomatic skills, our own diplomacy, where basically we are ambassadors of our beings, of what we represent here on Earth. And at the same time, the sign of Libra has also legal symbolism, where it can represent the law, it can represent court of justice, the course of justice, legislative, upgrades, changes, etc. So on one hand, this opposition of Mars and Mercury is where these two planets try to balance out their symbolism. So, the big picture is whatever choices, decisions, actions we take next week have a very strong chance to influence our legal situations, or they are also going to have legal effects. Let me just give you an example. If you quit a job, if you quit a career, well, that already influences your partnership from a strict legal perspective, because you're no longer part or representative of that company, or adapted to your own situation. At the same time, when you divorce, when you end a legal partnership, civil partnership for example, well, you're no longer tied to that person from a strict legal perspective, they're no longer part of your 7th house, which Libra rules, so to speak. Only perhaps the past of your 7th house. But this is an aspect of tension, so we have to be very, very careful what decision we make. We have to think it through profoundly. But even with all the wisdom, even with all the life experience, this energy is also a little bit fated, because no one can truly tell if the right choice lies with cold logic, rationality, Mercury and Libra, or if the right choice is following our raw emotions, our feelings, our inner impulses. Mars retrograde in Aries, especially that Mars retrograde thinks and analyzes everything through, whatever we wish, whatever is in our sovereign wills, whatever we desire, whatever we are passionate about. So the Mars retrograde also gives a theme to all of this period, where we not just make decisions, but we make those decisions based on a very strong retrospective of what we truly desire, of where we truly wish to be, and of course who it is or what it is that we wish to project on other people. Because Aries is the ruler of the first house called the Ascendant. So it is very, very important, because it is also part of our identity, part of the whole journey we take throughout life, which, shapes and forms our identity, and who it is that we feel that we truly are deep inside, and what we project onto other people determines how they perceive us or who they perceive us as. And the T-square, one of the planets that both Mercury and Mars are going to be squaring is Pluto. So this can also be a very powerful change, a very, very strong transformation. It can also represent basically the truth coming out, the greater truth. So what I'm trying to say here is, if something, as in a partnership, a contract, any kind of one-on-one relation, may it be legal or just moral or just, hard-based, it doesn't matter, because if that relationship doesn't reflect who you truly are in the present moment, chances are you're gonna do something about it. But of course this is true vice versa, because other people will naturally try and express who it is that they are, what it is that they truly wish and want from you or from a situation or whatever. So this is why it's an opposition, because this choice, this decision making is not yours alone, but also those who are part of your life, your partnerships, relations, one-on-one contracts, everything that has to do with the symbolism of Libra. And since Mercury is here, it can also have a great effect on your situation from a legal perspective, as I exemplified earlier. So next week we are truly going to weigh all of our relationship, especially the most important ones that are ruling our lives, so to speak, because that is the symbolism of Libra. The two scales, they have to be in balance with each other. They have to reflect equality and mutuality, reciprocality from a certain perspective. Of course, not every single person needs a very, very fair, equal relationship or any kind of connection with other people, because it really, really depends on our archetype, who we are, naturally our past choices, etc. But it has to be balanced, and it has to feel balanced for you personally. So if you're a person who is more supportive, stays more in the background, but this is your comfort, this is your normality, this is who you are, well, it has to still offer you some kind of balance. It has to make you feel comfortable with the situation. So, if you are this kind of person, if your relationships try to push you, in the spotlight, and that makes you very uncomfortable and it just annoys you, well, that is the equality that you have to create in your life, as in put a stop to that situation and explain to them that you are not comfortable with that kind of, self-expression. So one way or another, we, all of us, in at least one area of our lives, we are going to express who it is that we truly are, or who it is that we feel that we are. And we are going to demand other people, especially our closest relations, to respect that. And it is gonna have to be equal, mutual, the symbolism of Libra. Now on the world stage, this is a little bit more complicated, because Libra can represent international treaties, international agreements, international law, sentences, legal cases, the diplomacy between states, ambassadors, diplomatic relationship, diplomatic work, alliances. So we can expect very strong changes in all of what I said earlier playing out on the world stage. So for example, this doesn't necessarily have to be that negative, because an opposition has a lot of good sides to it. For example, if there is an unresolved diplomatic conflict, an unresolved diplomatic situation, like, just let me give you a real-time example. The diplomatic situation between Turkey and Greece, that they want to claim a territory, at sea, a very disputed, controversial territory. So that situation might find a resolution, maybe because, the international community intervenes, or an international court of justice, or something similar helps out. Now, other relationship can naturally deteriorate, and also Pluto in the sign of Capricorn, like treaties which were signed a long time ago and have been, enforced all throughout history, may suddenly change or perhaps be renewed, or it could be that a certain state or a world power, etc., ignores it and no longer wishes to respect it. So we can see this situation playing out on the world stage already, but we have to be prepared for more unexpected turn of events and resolutions of conflicts, of situations which might have a lot of compromises and strings attached to it. Because Saturn is also involved in this picture. On one hand, it is conjunct Pluto, and on the other hand, both Mercury and Mars are T-squaring Saturn as well, just that the T-square with Saturn becomes exact further on in the week. And Saturn has a very grounding effect, so on one hand it requires all of us to take into consideration palpable, physical, material reality and all its rules, what is truly possible and what isn't. And because of that, it can also represent limitations, very strong and rigid rules, maybe even customs, but they do offer grounding energy, they do offer stability, they offer, commitment for the long-term future, so it gets things done, regardless if there are compromises and manipulation in the picture. Now, the Mercury's square with Pluto can also play out in a very, very different way, because let's not forget the shadow side of Pluto, which is manipulation, deception, lies, getting what you want through unorthodox means, sometimes even outside the law. So be very careful of what contracts and what agreements you sign, especially if they have anything to do with money. For example, bank loans, credit, etc. Because you might not be really aware of what you're signing, especially for the long-term future. So read the contract in all of its detail, every single, even the most microscopic letter, because you have to know what you're agreeing to. And of course, it can also represent, abuses, legislative abuses coming from centralized power. Pluto in Capricorn is the strength, the power, the control of the governments, our leaders, big organizations, etc. So we may be forced to agree to something legally which we don't really agree to. And if we take the symbolism of Pluto in Capricorn, it can just be a unilateral change in legislation which makes something very, very unfair for the whole population. But we might not really have a choice or a saying in this unless, Mars square Pluto. Mars is the lower octave of Pluto, so that can represent conflict, uprising, revolution, massive protests, and even violence, excessive violence coming from, the people, citizens, because they feel disrespected totally. And this will also get more intense in the days to come, because Mars will once again be conjunct Eris, the planetoid of revolution, of discord, the female warrior and awakener who demands her rights, but her rights to be respected in almost in a perfect, imperative way, and she doesn't take any prisoners. So when these two very strong, impulsive energies, Mars and Eris, meet in the sky, and they square Pluto, the symbol of power, the symbol of change and transformation, well, we can expect a lot of conflicts regardless of their nature. And of course, there can also be a lot of problems, conflicts, etc. regarding the elections, if you happen to live in a country where the elections are coming up. Because, this can represent really shadowy compromises, and it can also represent, that the people basically have no one to vote for, choose for, because they don't agree to any of the candidates. So we can see turbulence and, uprising conflicts, even regarding, elections, because the sign of Libra, well, a president, for example, is a leader, so they would normally belong to the sign of Capricorn, but, they also are a representative of the people, of the state, so they equally belong to the sign of Libra, especially when they have to deal with other countries, because they are the core ambassador of a nation, of a culture. The opposition of Mercury and Mars retrograde is going to be exact on the 24th of September, so that can be a very important moment, because Mars is the activator, so regardless of what aspects it holds, its manifestation is instant, so we can expect something playing out on the world stage on the 24th of September. Now let's move on to a totally different kind of energy, because we are going to be hearing about the Mars and Capricorn planet squares all throughout the autumn, one way or another. These squares, these tensions will be like a permanent presence in our lives one way or another. And also me and most astrologers have been talking about this ever since the beginning of 2020, and many of us going back way further, because we kind of knew that this was coming. So at the very beginning of the week, we have an anaretic sun in the sign of Virgo. Anaretic means that when a planet nears 29 degrees of any sign, its symbolism is amplified. It is a karmic degree, so it favors completions, terminations, culminations, and many times the shadow aspect is emphasized on. And the sun in the sign of Virgo, well, it can represent a sense of urgency, a very strong neurological almost restlessness, where we truly want to complete all of our tasks, everything that we can just possibly finish, regardless if they are personal tasks, professional tasks, our job, at work, at our careers, something we have to do for our family. It can also be like a legal obligation, or sort certain problems out, even medical problems. And all of these will have a feeling of urgency that we just must do it in time. So if we might find ourselves a little bit paranoid, a little bit overthinking, where our monkey mind just goes out of control at the very beginning of the week, well, don't worry, because this energy is going to fade away the next day. And also another shadow expression of the sign of Virgo can be excessive criticism and perfectionistic tendencies taken to extremes, where it has to be a perfect match to our mental image regardless of what it is. And since the ruling planet Mercury of the sign of Virgo also speaks in tension with Mars and with Pluto, we have to be careful how we express ourselves, how we communicate, because we can be very, very offensive or come through as extremely critical, where we just slice with our words as if we would wield a very sharp weapon. And naturally that can lead to conflicts and, upsetting the feelings of other people, or other people upsetting our feelings. But we have to be aware that this is nothing personal. It is just like the shadow expression of the sign of Virgo. And the very next day, on the 22nd of September, not only does the sun move into the sign of Libra, but also we have the very magical autumn equinox, a special moment when the veil between the worlds is that much thinner, so we can expect, on one hand, the universe to be that much more receptive to our desires, to our dreams, to our wishes, to our seeds of intention. And also it can be a karmic energy of revelation, guidance, and naturally karmic manifestations. Now the sun in the sign of Libra is considered to be debilitated, so it isn't that strong. But this is actually a very good sign, because the sun can represent our identities, who we are in the deep core of our heart. And since the sun enters the dual sign of Libra, well, this is where we can treat other people as equals to us. If we love ourselves, if we love our freedom, if we love our self-expression, then naturally we accept, tolerate those of other people and treat them as equals. And this is why the sun entering into the sign of Libra is a really, really good energy. And because people generally have the tendency to treat other people just a tiny bit more fairly than usual, it is always one of my favorite seasons, one of my favorite astrological energies, when the sun's gentle light illuminates all the beauty in our interhuman relationships. Because Libra is the day sign of Venus, goddess of love and beauty. But from a totally different perspective, while Mercury is already in this part of the sky, and it does oppose Mars, so that means a big, big cry out for equality, for non-discrimination, and naturally for justice, for true justice, which of course is subjective by nature. But in an imperfect world, everything that we're going to have is going to be still imperfect, and it has to be okay and beautiful the way it is. Now also, on the day of the equinox, Venus is conjunct Vesta in the sign of Leo. Now this is a supremely beautiful energy, because Venus in the sign of Leo, now it represents the power, the passion, the love, the beauty of our feelings, of everything that is alive in our hearts, in our heart spaces, the inner child, of course. And Vesta is the goddess of the sacred flame, so it represents passion, but in its most divine, in its most ultimate octaves. So what a beautiful and joyous energy this is. Immersing into our passions, everything that we truly love, all of our hardcore desires, can produce such a strong vibration of joy, of happiness, of simply living through life in its most joyous expression, that beautiful energy of ours, that resonance of our heart can simply fill the air, the whole universe, with the energy of what we enjoy, and that naturally makes us magnetic to even more blessings, because we advantage the vibration, the frequency of both nature, the universe, the cosmos, and including the human collective, if we emanate, if we become batteries of joy, of happiness, of love, naturally, of sensuality, of true divine passion, when we align ourselves, that sacred fire burning in our hearts, which is basically the desire, the thirst for life. So I do believe that Venus being conjunct with Vesta at exactly the day of the equinox is not a coincidence. This might be one of the most valuable and profound lessons of this autumn, because what is an equinox? Well, it starts the cycle of the next 3 months, a season, the season of autumn. And from an astrological perspective, however the sky is on the day of the equinox, that is like a pitching fork that gives the tune, the overall frequency of the whole period. So without a doubt, one of the biggest lessons that we have to embody is to live life passionately, is to live for the sake of everything that we love and hold dear and sacred. And of course, the governing energy of Leo, while home isn't a place in the world, home isn't where you truly physically live, but it is inside our hearts. And if we are happy, if we are content, if we have passions burning in our hearts, then we are always at home. We are always found. Now another energy, which is a minor astrological influence, is Venus going to be forming quincunxes with Jupiter and Neptune. Now a quincunx ties together two areas of life which have absolutely nothing in common with each other. So this can always create surprises, unexpected events, sometimes delightful surprises, other time awkward moments, embarrassing moments, shameful moments. But at the same time, we can consider all of this as the divine mind, the universe having a small moment of humor, a laugh. So Venus quincunx Jupiter can represent a lot of different expressions, because Jupiter is the great benefic and Venus is the lower benefic, bestower of blessings. So blessings can come and enter your life unexpectedly, but on one hand, they have to appeal to everything that is within your heart, because Venus is in the sign of Leo. It can be, for example, presents, recognitions. It can be the energy of optimism and hope, promises maybe, coming to you in a very unexpected way, in perhaps a symbolic way. But at the same time, Jupiter is in the earthly sign of Capricorn, so it can manifest in a very different way. So be careful what you wish for, because you might get it, you might receive it, but perhaps in a way which is a little bit humorous, which is not very logical to the mind, but it can make perfect sense to the heart. But at the same time, Venus in Leo, it can be romantic declarations expressed through gestures, Jupiter. It can be the inner truth of someone, how someone sees and perceives life, surprising you, inspiring you, delighting you, or shocking you and, forcing you to appreciate yourself and your own normality that much more. And a quincunx with Neptune, well, this is where we have to be very, very careful not to promise and not to believe, big fantasy-like promises. Even if those promises come in dreams, even if those promises come as prophecies, as divine signs, we have to be careful not to take them literally. Another expression of this quincunx, well, it can be someone from your past returning and surprising you. It can be a romantic partner, it can be a childhood friend. And this meeting, this reunion can conjure up beautiful, nostalgic moments, and this reconnection can just delight your heart and all of your senses. Now, talk about Venus. She also holds a trine, a supremely harmonious celestial conversation with Mars from the sign of Aries, but this trine is not going to be exact yet next week, but towards the end of the week it is gonna come online, so to speak, and be rather influential. Of course, this energy can also be interpreted in various different ways. For example, this trine can represent that your passions, what you truly, truly desire in the deep core of your heart, can make you that magnetic that you just attract it into your life one way or another. Especially if that passion or desire was unfulfilled in the past, Mars retrograde. It can also be an infusion of courage, of self-confidence, physical beauty, etc. Especially if you are a person who struggled with this in the past, Mars retrograde. That can give you such a very strong impulse to basically go out there and conquer what your heart desires, Venus in Leo. It can be a person, the heart of another person. It can be, for example, getting a position somewhere, attracting something that you're very passionate about into your life. There is so very many ways this energy can play out. But even though it's a trine, so it's something beautiful, harmonious, something that will ultimately give us pleasure, joy, make us feel that we are living our passions or, living life more sensually. We have to be careful not to go into excess because, Mars and Venus together like this can be a very persuasive energy, but when it is our instincts that represent the force of persuasion, so making huge purchases, cosmetic transformations, or any kind of extreme gesture which kind of changes something permanently is not a very good idea just because we desire it and just because we cannot say no to our desires. If it's not perfectly logical, or if there is a chance for us to regret it deeply in the more distant future, well, then we must not really follow this impulse through, only with measure, Let me just give you one example. If for any reason, maybe a person is inspired by this Mars and Venus trine to shave off their hair, especially if they have long, beautiful, nurtured hair of the best quality because they just want to prove a point or they got passionate about something, well, it's not really a good idea because you might feel so very different about this when Venus leaves the sign of Leo. So, if do what you like, do what brings you pleasure, what makes you feel more alive, what delights the inner child, but make sure you're not gonna regret it. And finally, at the very, very end of the week, Mercury is going to be moving into the sign of Scorpio. So this also means that the squares and the opposition that Mercury held are going to be over. But the feelings, the memories, the inner thought processes, so to speak, that they conjured up inside of us while the square were ongoing might be very, very relevant, because Mercury in Scorpio doesn't forget ever. Mercury in Scorpio is extremely analytical. It is almost like a detective energy, like a psychologist energy. But we are not really talking about this positive psychotherapy here. We're talking about like forensic psychology, profiler, etc. So it is like a very, very scientific, analytical, getting straight to the mystery, straight to the enigma type of energy. So whatever Mercury, so to speak, symbolically suffered while it transited the sign of Libra, so what we received, what we got from our partnerships, regardless of their nature, well, we might act upon them once Mercury goes into Scorpio, especially that the very first aspect that it's going to hold is with Juno in the 0 degrees in the sign of Scorpio. So, that can mean that we are definitely going to act on the feelings that we received, on the feelings that were generated inside of us. And some people not in the most, pleasant sense, because Juno is what you get is what you give, and if it's needed, in excess. What I'm trying to actually say here is, well, Juno in the sign of Scorpio can be like a passive vengeful. It is where it doesn't actually seek vengeance in a very active manner, but given the chance that an opportunity arises, to simply give back what they received, especially if that something was not a very pleasant feeling, they will be sure to act upon it and, deliver justice in this kind of way. And also, Mercury conjunct Juno in Scorpio can be an energy of envy, because it might bring all of our repressed desires to the surface, but these desires naturally are rather superficial. For example, why don't I have the car that my neighbor does when I'm a much more deserving person? This is just one example of how this energy can play out. So we have to be very, very careful not to compare ourselves with others, live our own stories, not the stories of another person, because their lives and their inner configuration is totally different. But other than this, if you have to get to the bottom of something, Mercury in Scorpio is the best energy for this, regardless if it's something like psychological, something that is deep inside of you, your unconscious mind, or figure out a secret, or, investigate another person's case. Even if it's simply scientific investigation, it is a really, really good energy. So this can be something really positive for the world stage, because when Mercury is in the sign of Scorpio, now that is when, medical science reaches the peak of the year. That is when significant researches are accomplished, especially in medical domains, especially, those industries which either heal, regenerate, transform our lives. So this can be really, really good news for the coronavirus situation. And even the 8th house, Scorpio is the ruler of the 8th house, so it has financial aspects, it has financial qualities, loans, debt, etc., money that we share with others, money that we have in common values with others. So this can also be a good sign, a good energy to sort out the financial aspects, or at least give it a very good try, or at least, figure out, make a very precise mental picture of what we can expect in the close future. Well, this concludes your horoscope. I do hope that you enjoyed it and you found it useful. And remember, if you need a personal reading, just log on to 1millionnights.com and find your dedicated advisor, where in the month of September we have a special promotion. If you buy any of our prepaid packages, you get 10% bonus. Thank you once again for listening. Have a blessed and wonderful week. Until next time, bye for now.